In a world where children are meant to feel safe and loved, Damien was anything but ordinary. A quiet, broken boy, his eyes spoke of years of hurt, betrayal, and abandonment. But one day in a courtroom full of strangers, he did something no one expected. He looked at a judge and said, "You're my mom." That moment would change everything. From the moment he was born, Damien had never known what it was to feel secure in the arms of someone who would never let him go. His life, marked by instability, seemed like a constant whirlwind of neglect, rejection, and brief fleeting moments of hope that were never allowed to take root. As a child of the foster care system, his story was one that was far too familiar. He was bounced from home to home, from family to family, each place offering a semblance of love, but never enough to heal the wounds that ran deep within his heart. Damien's earliest memories were of being in a crowded, noisy orphanage. The screams of other children, the lack of attention from the overworked staff, and the overwhelming sense of loneliness that seemed to follow him wherever he went. All of this shaped his view of the world. He longed for stability, for someone to call mom, someone who would hold him close and tell him that everything would be okay. But the reality of his existence was far from that wish. He had been in and out of foster homes since he was just a baby. Every time he started to feel like maybe, just maybe, this time things would be different, a sudden disruption would occur. The families he stayed with were well-meaning, but they often didn't understand the profound impact of a child's needs who had been through trauma. The kindness they showed him was often overshadowed by their inability to fully comprehend what it meant to raise a child like him, a child who had been robbed of a proper foundation and desperately needed someone to help him rebuild. There was one home, though, where he thought he had found a safe haven, a kind woman named Mrs. Williams. She tried her best to provide Damien with the love and care he had always yearned for, but it was short-lived. She was a single woman, overwhelmed with her own struggles, and ultimately, she couldn't provide the emotional consistency Damien needed. Soon, she had to send him back into the system. The rejection he felt when he left her home was devastating. It was like a cruel reminder that he was disposable, never meant to truly belong anywhere. By the time Damien was 9 years old, he had lost count of how many different homes he had been in. His young heart had become hardened, though not by choice. He had learned early on not to get too attached, not to allow himself to believe in the promises of stability that came and went. His trust in adults had been broken time and time again, and the loneliness was almost unbearable. On the day of the court hearing, Damien didn't know what to expect. It wasn't his first time in front of a judge. The system had told him that his case would be decided today, whether he would stay in foster care for the rest of his life, or if someone would finally be able to provide him with the permanent home he so desperately needed. But even as he entered the courtroom, Damien's heart was shielded by a wall of guarded indifference. He had learned that there was no point in hoping anymore. The atmosphere in the courtroom was intimidating. He had seen it all before. The lawyers talking in clipped tones, the officials looking at their papers, the parents or guardians who had their lives together, while he felt like an outsider to it all. He could feel his anxiety building up as he sat there, waiting for the proceedings to begin. His eyes moved nervously around the room, trying to find something to focus on, something that could give him even a hint of comfort, but nothing brought him peace. Then his gaze landed on the judge. She was sitting behind her bench, her face stern and focused. She was older than he had imagined, with a demeanor that suggested authority, strength, and control. But something about her intrigued him. There was a warmth in her eyes that, for just a moment, caught his attention. She was different from the other adults he had encountered, even though he couldn't quite place why. It wasn't until the judge spoke, calling Damien's name, that he fully understood the gravity of what was happening. It was his turn. He stood up, feeling a strange sense of apprehension in his chest. The boy, now facing the judge, stood frozen for a moment. As the judge asked him questions, Damien hesitated, but there was something in her voice, something that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just another courtroom moment. This could be different. As the judge continued with the proceedings, Damien couldn't help but notice her presence, her eyes watching him intently, her voice calm but firm. And it was in that moment, when the weight of years of abandonment and neglect seemed to bear down on him, that something inside Damien broke. He didn't know where the words came from, but they poured out of him before he could stop them. "You're my mom," he said softly, his voice trembling. The room fell silent. The words hung in the air, as if they carried a weight so heavy that it could barely be contained. Everyone in the courtroom, attorneys, social workers, even the other children who were there, paused. No one had expected this. But the raw honesty in Damien's words shattered the carefully constructed walls around everyone present. For a brief moment, all eyes were on the boy, the vulnerable, broken child who had reached out in the only way he knew how, seeking the love and security that had been denied to him for so long. His heart, though bruised, was still capable of hope, and in that one simple statement, he had expressed everything he had ever wanted. For Judge Eleanor Hartwell, those words struck deeper than any verdict she had ever delivered in her long, esteemed career. "You're my mom." It echoed not just through the courtroom's cold marble walls, but straight through her chest, cutting through years of rigid professionalism, breaking down barriers she had spent decades building to protect herself from precisely this kind of vulnerability. On the outside, she didn't flinch. Her years on the bench had trained her to maintain a steady composure even under the most harrowing circumstances. But inside, a storm she thought she had long ago silenced began to churn. The boy's face, his eyes, his voice. It was as if the universe had reached backward into her own past, unearthing a secret she had buried so deep, even she no longer acknowledged it. Eleanor had dedicated her life to the child welfare court because, long ago, she had lived a different version of Damien's story herself. Few knew that in her early 20s, she had faced a choice that had haunted her relentlessly. A choice between pursuing her law career and raising the child she had given birth to during her final year of law school. Alone, broke, and terrified. Pressured by her circumstances and convinced by social workers that adoption would offer her child a better life than she ever could, she had relinquished him. It was a closed adoption. She was never to know where he went or what became of him. Years passed, decades even, and though her career flourished, her heart never healed. The silent ache of that decision never lessened. She had masked it behind rulings, court cases, and law books, convincing herself that the life she built helping vulnerable children was her way of atoning for what she had done. But Damien shattered that illusion. She cleared her throat, steadying her voice. "Damien, why did you say that?" she asked softly, her judicial tone deliberately gentle, not wanting to intimidate him further. The boy shrugged, his small shoulders twitching with uncertainty. His lips quivered slightly before he spoke again. "Because you look like someone who wouldn't leave me," he murmured. You, you looked at me like a mom's supposed to. No one's ever looked at me like that." Eleanor felt her breath catch. How was it possible? Out of all the children she had seen in this courtroom, why did this boy seem to see straight into the very soul she had hidden away for so long? She kept her eyes steady on him, but she gripped the edge of her desk harder, as if anchoring herself to the reality she was trying not to drown in. The courtroom remained still. No one interrupted. Not the attorneys, not the social workers, not even the other waiting families. Somehow, instinctively, they all knew something profound was unfolding in front of them. Something rare, something sacred. Her mind raced. Damien's file. She had read it last night. Born in 2015. abandoned at a hospital. No parental claims, no family ties on record. She hadn't paid attention to the exact details of his birth location then, but now a cold sweat formed on her back. His birthday. It was exactly the same month and year as the grandson she had never met. No, no. Her son would have been much older now. She shook off the irrational thought. This was coincidence. Painful, poetic coincidence. Nothing more. Yet somehow her heart refused to let the idea go. She softened her gaze and spoke again. Damien, do you know why you're here today? He nodded. They said no one wants me again, so I have to stay in foster care till I'm big. His voice dropped. Big means alone. Her chest constricted. She had spoken to countless children in similar circumstances, but never had the words cut this sharply. Her usual detachment failed her now. This wasn't just another case file. This was a boy pleading for belonging, and somehow, inexplicably, pleading to her directly. For the first time in her career, Eleanor felt uncertain of her next move. But one thing was clear. She could not let this moment pass her by as she had let so many others slip through her fingers. She leaned slightly forward, lowering her voice to a warm whisper meant only for him. Damien, would you be willing to tell me more about yourself? I want to understand what makes you feel safe. What makes you happy? His eyes widened. No adult had ever asked him that before. Not like that. Not with that kind of sincerity. He nodded shyly, and for the first time since he had entered the courtroom, the faintest hint of a smile flickered across his face. It was small, tentative, and fragile. But it was there. As Damien spoke, slowly at first, but then with increasing trust, Eleanor listened, really listened. His favorite color was blue because it reminded him of the sky he used to stare at from orphanage windows. He liked peanut butter sandwiches because one foster home had made them every Friday, and Fridays were the only days he didn't feel scared. He was scared of thunder because, when he was little, no one came to check on him when the storms got loud. With each word, Eleanor's heart unraveled further. It wasn't just Damien's pain she was hearing. It was her own child's, too. The child she had left. The child who might have wondered for years why his mother had never come back. And in that moment, for reasons even she couldn't yet explain, she made a silent vow to herself. Damien would not be left behind again. That night, long after the courtroom had emptied and the echoes of footsteps faded into silence, Judge Eleanor Hartwell sat alone in her chambers. Damien's file spread open before her. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the worn coffee-stained pages. Case notes, evaluations, medical reports. Every document painted a picture of a boy whose life had been nothing but a patchwork of temporary shelters, broken promises, and forgotten birthdays. But something else tugged at her deeper still. His birth certificate. Her eyes locked onto it. Born May 2nd, 2015, St. Augustine Memorial Hospital. Her breath caught sharply. That hospital. It was the very same one where, decades ago, she had given birth to her son. Her mind raced again, battling with questions she had tried to suppress since the moment Damien called her Mom. It was impossible, wasn't it? Yet why did fate insist on intertwining their paths so deliberately? Eleanor knew the rules better than anyone. Judges were expected to maintain strict professional boundaries, to never cross into personal involvement with cases before them. But in that dim-lit office, as moonlight poured through the tall windows and cast long shadows on the wood-paneled walls, her heart spoke louder than any judicial code. She picked up her phone, dialed a number she had memorized long ago, but never had the courage to call. The private investigator she once hired in secret to track any information about her biological son. A voice answered, gruff, familiar. I need a favor, Eleanor whispered. I need to know if Damien's case has any link. to my past adoption records. For the first time in decades, her voice cracked. In the days that followed, Eleanor found herself drawn to Damien in subtle but undeniable ways. Every hearing, every meeting, every chance she had to advocate for him, she took it fiercely, passionately, and Damien, he blossomed under her attention. He smiled more. He laughed, sometimes softly, sometimes unguarded. His grades improved. His trust slowly rebuilt. People began to notice. The clerks, the social workers, even her fellow judges. Whispers circulated, but Eleanor didn't care. She was no longer a woman chasing perfection or status. She was a mother, whether by blood, by spirit, or by fate itself, reclaiming the piece of her soul she thought was lost forever. Weeks later, the investigator returned with the results. As he laid the documents gently on her desk, his eyes softened with uncharacteristic empathy. "Judge, Damien is not your son, but," he pointed to a name listed under Damien's biological mother. Her son's name. Eleanor gasped. Damien. Damien was her grandson. The realization overwhelmed her. Tears filled her eyes, spilling unchecked onto her cheeks. Something that hadn't happened publicly in over 30 years. This was not coincidence. This was destiny's intricate design, unfolding precisely where her heart had longed to return. She made her decision that day. It would be unconventional. It might be criticized. But she would fight, with every ounce of legal power and maternal love she possessed, to bring Damien home. The next morning, Eleanor Hartwell rose with a clarity she hadn't felt in decades. As she donned her black robe and gathered her case files, her heart no longer felt weighed down by decades of regret and formality. For once, it felt purposeful, aligned with something far greater than rulings and regulations. Her first move was deliberate. She formally recused herself from Damien's case, ensuring there would be no conflict of interest clouding the process. It was a painful step, stepping back from the bench where she had first laid eyes on him, but necessary. Then quietly but firmly, she filed paperwork expressing her intention to become Damien's legal guardian. The child welfare system bristled. There were procedural hurdles, questioning glances from her colleagues, even raised eyebrows from senior administrators who couldn't quite grasp why a woman of her age and status, a respected judge near retirement, would entangle herself so deeply with a boy from such a fractured background. "You've had a flawless career, Eleanor," one of her longtime friends, a fellow judge, cautioned gently over coffee. "Why jeopardize that now? You've worked too hard to risk everything for a case." But this wasn't just a case. It was bloodline. It was redemption. It was love. With meticulous precision, Eleanor gathered her arguments, not as a judge, but as an advocate, as a grandmother reclaiming her family. She petitioned social services, submitted character references from colleagues and lifelong friends, and completed every requirement demanded of prospective guardians: home inspections, psychological evaluations, financial assessments. She complied with each one unflinchingly. Meanwhile, Damien remained unaware of the legal storm brewing on his behalf. He continued to thrive under the subtle care Eleanor provided from a distance. Small gestures, a book left anonymously on his foster home's doorstep, tutoring support arranged quietly through contacts, and check-ins disguised as routine court follow-ups, all served to shield and support him. But as weeks turned into months, resistance stiffened. One social worker, skeptical of Eleanor's motives, filed an objection. "Is this guardianship driven by guilt, Your Honor, or nostalgia? Either way, can a woman of nearly 70 provide the stability and energy Damien needs long-term?" It was a harsh blow, but Eleanor did not falter. She stood before the family court, ironically the same place she had presided over for decades, and delivered the most personal argument of her life. I have made judgments for 35 years based on evidence, law, and precedent, she declared, her voice unwavering. But today I ask the court to see what the law sometimes overlooks: the human bond that defies logic, that transcends protocol. Damien is not just a case file. He is my family, and I am ready to be his. Her words, seasoned with wisdom and layered with raw, undeniable love, silenced the courtroom. The judge presiding, a younger colleague who had long admired Eleanor, simply nodded, visibly moved. I will take this under serious consideration. For the first time in months, Eleanor allowed herself hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, love and justice could finally coexist. After months of legal battles and countless hearings, the day finally arrived. The day Eleanor Hartwell had longed for with every fiber of her being. The courtroom, once a familiar arena of rulings and procedures, had now transformed into the stage of her life's most personal trial. This time, she did not sit behind the bench as the dispenser of justice. She stood humbly before it, not as a judge, but as a woman, as a grandmother, ready to reclaim the family she never knew she still had. The room was silent, thick with anticipation. Damien sat quietly nearby, still unaware of the full truth. His young, searching eyes held the same unspoken question that had echoed the day he first uttered the words, "You're my mom." His gaze flickered between the judge and Eleanor, as if his heart sensed something monumental was about to shift. Eleanor's hands, though aged, were steady as she held the final stack of documents and character references. Her life, her story, her plea. The presiding judge, a thoughtful woman who had once been Eleanor's protégée, adjusted her glasses and peered down, her expression unreadable. I have reviewed all materials submitted, the judge began, her voice measured and calm. And I have consulted with social services, counselors, and child advocates. This case is unusual, unorthodox even, but at its core lies a singular question. What is in the best interest of Damien? The room remained breathless. Turning her eyes directly to Eleanor, the judge's tone softened. This court recognizes that familial bonds are not always simple or conventional. Sometimes they are rediscovered. Sometimes they are reborn. Ms. Hartwell, your history, your unwavering commitment, and the profound connection you have shown to Damien, these cannot be ignored. A pause, a beat that felt like eternity. Then, the words that cracked the world wide open. Your petition for guardianship is granted. The gavel fell, not with the cold, distant authority of countless past rulings, but with a finality that resonated with warmth and hope. Eleanor gasped softly. Her breath hitched, her shoulders trembled, but this time they trembled with release, with gratitude too vast to contain. Damien, confused at first, looked to her hesitantly. Slowly, tentatively, Eleanor rose from her seat, walked toward him, and knelt to meet him eye to eye. Damien, her voice broke gently, I'm not just your judge. I'm your grandmother, and you're coming home. For a heartbeat, time stood still. The boy's eyes widened, shimmering with realization. And then, without hesitation, he threw his arms around her. Fierce, desperate, unfiltered love pouring out of him in waves that no courtroom had ever witnessed. Tears glistened in the eyes of even the most hardened clerks and attorneys present. In that embrace, two fractured lives, scattered by time, by circumstance, by systems, mended into one. It wasn't just a legal verdict, it was a verdict of love. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor and Damien began a journey neither of them had ever expected, but both desperately needed. Their lives, once defined by courtrooms and cold files, slowly transformed into something softer, warmer, something profoundly human. Eleanor's stately house, once quiet and sterile, now echoed with the laughter and footsteps of a young boy rediscovering safety. Where thick legal texts once lined her shelves, now sat science fiction novels and sketchbooks filled with Damien's drawings. The grand piano, untouched for decades, sang again under Damien's curious fingers as Eleanor sat beside him, gently guiding him through scales. The community, at first startled by the unconventional guardianship, soon embraced the pair. Neighbors who had long admired Eleanor's professional distance now witnessed a different side of her, the side of a woman patiently teaching a child to ride a bicycle in the park or sitting quietly beside him during school plays, pride glowing on her face. But their healing wasn't just external. Slowly, through late-night conversations and small confessions, wounds deeper than either had dared to admit began to mend. Damien spoke of the foster homes where he had never quite belonged, the loneliness of waiting for a family that never came. Eleanor, in turn, shared her regrets, how she had once chosen career over personal life, and how she had lost her daughter, Damien's mother, long before she realized the true cost of distance. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Damien quietly leaned against her shoulder. "Do you think my mom would be proud of us?" he asked, his voice small but hopeful. Eleanor swallowed the lump in her throat and wrapped an arm around him gently. "I think she would be more than proud," she whispered. "I think she would know that, through all the pain and all the lost time, we found each other, and we're honoring her by building something new." That night, as Damien fell asleep, safe under her roof, Eleanor sat alone in the quiet of her study. She gazed at an old photograph of her daughter, the daughter she had once lost to life's unforgiving tides, and for the first time in years allowed herself to smile, a smile of peace, a smile that knew redemption is never too late. Her life as a judge had taught her that justice is often slow and imperfect, but what she learned from Damien was something far greater, that sometimes justice takes the form of a second chance at love, and in the end, that was the only verdict that ever truly mattered.